There is a point, subdued, near imperceptible, where you no longer recognize the individual you once were. It doesn't herald itself with trumpets or revelation. It whispers. You wake up one morning, and the mirror shows a stranger who somehow seems more familiar than the face you've worn for years. The old fears that used to preoccupy your mind suddenly seem distant, alien, as though belonging to some other person altogether. What you're about to learn will haunt you, because once you know, you can't unknow. Once you know what has been going on behind the scenes of your mind, every relationship, every response, every decision you've ever made will suddenly make perfect, horrific sense. There are unseen forces operating in your life at this moment, patterns you've been going through without even realizing why, feelings that govern your choices in ways you've never even been aware of, a part of yourself that has quietly been breaking down without you even noticing, and what's to come will either destroy the illusion you've been living or show you that the illusion was already on the verge of breaking. The question is, are you prepared to view what has been hiding in plain sight? You are not here by coincidence. Something inside you, something quiet but strong, directed you to this video at this exact moment. And when you're finished, you will know why. This is not another coincidence in your life. This is a nudge from your inner self, a subtle shove from your soul that's been pushing you without clamor or fanfare. Because becoming more than who you used to be is not a loud and theatrics kind of change. It does not accompany fireworks and big announcements. It is something subtle, nearly invisible, an unseen process that takes place within. It is not about being somebody else with physical modifications. It is about letting go of what never was yours to begin with. It is about recollecting who you always were in essence. This kind of change doesn't yell, it whispers. It's as if you wake up one morning and you realize that you don't belong anymore to the self you used to hold on to. You no longer identify with the same places, with the same words, or even with the same aspects of yourself that used to make you, you. Carl Jung once stated that spiritual growth properly lies not in your perfection of your personality. It is a result of surpassing it from releasing everything that is not a priority, all that was constructed as armor or delusion to remember the heart of your soul, that still and impenetrable truth that has always been inside you. And one of the first indicators of this transformation is that you no longer find yourself in your past narrative. What was once the core of who you are now seems foreign, like observing a vintage film. You can see it, even recall it, but it no longer makes you. You don't need to disown it, nor do you sense a wave of nostalgia for it. You are at peace when you recall it, because now you are able to witness your path without having to tell it or defend it. You no longer narrate your story from the wound. You do not identify who you are with what you endured or with what you accomplished. You understand that all of it was on your path, but you also know with a profound and unshatterable faith that your value is not quantified by any of that. What occurred no longer dictates who you are. Neither does it restrict what you can be, and in the place previously occupied by guilt or pride, something new emerges, an easy freedom which permits you to perceive your past for what it truly is, the past. This emotional distance is not detachment, it's integration. You don't need anyone to get your pain anymore. You don't need validation of what you endure. You don't need to justify what made you you. You just know it. Your silence gives it respect, and that is sufficient. You find that the things that previously set you off, that previously stirred something deep in you, now move through you without leaving marks. Words that once cut you now evaporate in your mind. People that previously held you to old parts of yourself start to let go, not because you repudiate them, but because there is nothing left in you for them to grasp. As you move beyond your old self, your emotions no longer control your responses, not because you lose touch with your feelings, but because you understand how to distinguish which part of you responds from the current moment and which part merely responds out of habit. Your inner monologue shifts. The things you used to rehearse out of necessity no longer resound within you. You no longer need to find redemption. You don't punish yourself for who you once were. You just notice, and proceed as though something inside of you knew each of the previous chapters was needed to get you to where you are. That profound knowledge isn't a product of the mind, it's a product of the soul, and it is within that consciousness that your old self starts to unravel, not because it vanishes, but because you no longer reside there. And when you are no longer living in that older you, something inside you feels lighter. You don't forget what you experienced, you just no longer require it as your foundation. Your decisions start to emerge from a freer, more conscious spot, closer to who you truly are, not out of the narrative you used to have about yourself. Self-defense that felt so concrete. This is just the way I am, or I just can't change start to fade. Not because you struggle against them, but because they no longer fit the person you're emerging as. You no longer behave out of a desire to hold a strong identity. You've discovered that your soul doesn't require labels to live. It's not about breaking down who you used to be. It's about respecting what was and creating a new path without bringing along what holds you back. You release the need to hold on to the person you built to survive. You no longer have the urge to replay emotional patterns or conform to places you've outgrown, and the kindness with which you release, the smoothness with which you let go without resistance, is the greatest indication that you're no longer resonating from a conditioned self. You're starting to live from your authentic self, the self that doesn't have to defend or prove anything, the self just as it is. And something else begins to occur. Your style of relating to other people shifts, and not because you've orchestrated it, it just happens. You start relating to people from a more transparent, honest place, less burdened. You no longer look to other people for what you've learned to provide yourself. You no longer look for a savior. You are no longer required to be seen in order to be real. Your existence is no longer something you negotiate because of fear of loneliness. Previously, your relationships were established through need, through unspoken contracts, based on suffering, through unconscious emotional transactions. But now there's room, space to breathe, space to think before acting, space to witness without taking everything in. When you transcend, you break the cycles of emotional patterning that once held you prisoner, not because the world has transformed itself, but because you no longer make choices from your wounds. Your sensitivity no longer blinds you. Your surrender no longer stems from emptiness. It comes from balance, and that changes everything. Your relationships no longer become a reflection of what you are missing, and instead reflect what you already are. You no longer yearn for dialogue to ward off silence or intimacy to ward off yourself. You're finally free to give from fullness, not from lack. And this is the nature of profound transformation. When you don't have to be anything other than what you are, when your history no longer holds you captive, when your feelings are messengers, not masters, when your tale turns into a sacred memory rather than a living script, then you know you've started to remember who you truly are. Even when nobody else identifies with you, there isn't drama, no resentment or internal fissure, because your emotional equilibrium no longer hangs in the balance based on someone else's desire to remain. You no longer leave your peace in someone else's care, and that shift, that quiet and intangible shift, shifts everything. When you start to live from emotional independence, you find a freedom that not only feels emancipating, but that also provides you with stability. You're no longer running or grasping, you're just present, and that is sufficient. Your presence, which was once an understudy aspect of who you were, becomes your new language of love. A love that does not require, that does not beg to be noticed, that does not seek reciprocity in order to feel real. It's a less boastful, deeper, and truer love. It does not yell through vows, nor acts affection to be accepted. It's just continuous, consistent, and tranquil, not because it attempts to prove it, but because it doesn't have to. You start to relate from a place of authenticity, not out of the desire to keep up an image or play a role. You no longer expend energy on conversations that aren't true. You also don't keep relationships based on habit or history alone. Your higher, more calibrated energy naturally sifts out that which is not in alignment. And though that process is painful, it is also relieving. It creates clarity. Your former self used to pick from necessity, out of fear of being left behind, out of desperation to be loved at any price. But now you no longer pick that way because you've reconciled with your own silence. You've learnt to be with it, to open it up as an old friend. You understand that the presence of one who does not really resonate with you can be more isolating than your own aloneness. So you remain with yourself, even if that means leaving behind that which you had believed to be love. You cease to confuse intensity with sincerity and drama with profundity. You start to see that what peace brings is what really has depth, and what must be tensioned constantly to exist is usually a facade of disconnection. You don't try to make others understand anymore. You don't need to persuade anyone of your evolution or explain why you can no longer exist in places that suffocate your soul. Your vibration, the energy you give off by simply being you, starts to speak louder than any words, and without meaning to elicits responses from those who haven't yet crossed their own thresholds. Some will go away, others will move in, but from another location, from honesty, not from necessity, and you'll be in harmony with both, because your center is no longer established by your relationships. Now your center establishes your relationships. In this new dynamic, what remains does so, because it really speaks to something, not because it's being held together. This deep shift in the way you interact with other people quietly reconfigures all of reality. What was once necessary now dissolves softly, and this is not rejection, it's clarity. Clarity that arises from having worked through your own darkness to the point where you no longer feel compelled to project it onto others. Your former self needed mirrors, individuals who would validate your existence, who would occupy your open spaces with half-presences and fleeting comforts, but you're not there anymore for that kind of connection. You've learned that a real connection doesn't use you up, it fills you out. It doesn't make you betray your nature, it asks you to more fully live it. And when you start to connect from this new energy, everything shifts. Connections are more subtle, more authentic, lighter. The power of a bond is no longer based on how loud or big it is, but on how often, in that quiet place where two hearts can just be in each other's presence without excuse, without rescue, without attachment. In this new place, you learn to establish boundaries, not out of fear, but out of love, self-love, and these boundaries do not separate. They bring harmony. They bring structure to your time, your inner space. You no longer tire yourself keeping what is not in growth with you. You no longer remain out of fear of losing what's left. You've transitioned to another frequency, one that does not excuse itself for growing. You no longer feel compelled to apologize for selecting your truth, and that in itself is evidence your old self is no longer steering your relationships. Now it's your soul, and your soul only selects what sustains, what lifts, what reminds you of who you actually are. From here, you start to get what the real purpose of companionship is, not to finish you, but to reveal what you've already become. You no longer hide in others, because you've become your own sanctuary, and this energetic independence doesn't equate to isolation. It means soul maturity. You cease to carry other people's emotions. You cease to absorb what others won't transmute. You no longer get caught up in the trap of healing others who haven't made the choice to heal for themselves. You no longer disintegrate into patterns where you attempted to be enough by becoming less than you. Because now you understand that true love isn't sacrifice masquerading as such. It's presence without pressure, connection without chains, and it's in that clean and quiet connection where the most powerful things start to happen. You're becoming a mirror of change for other people, not because you're trying to lead or direct them, but just because your frequency reaches them. Your presence in coherence starts unveiling some truths that other people have evaded deep within themselves for a very long time. Some will appreciate it, and others will fight, but either way, you'll be in peace, because your relationship is no longer based on duty or obligation. It's based on the choice to be your true self, and it's in that place where you realize something deep. The deepest, most meaningful relationships are not the ones that guarantee more, but the ones that respect the other's growth. That sense of connection can only happen after you've had your own personal awakening. You confronted your old self, accepted it, and let it go with love, not rejection, but compassion. You now understand that your former self wasn't wrong or damaged. It was merely attempting to shield you from harm in the best way it could. But now that you no longer have to be protected, now you no longer have to hide behind a mask or wear a disguise in order to feel lovable. You've ceased the effort to be loved. Now you just are, and that is sufficient. Without effort, without the need for approval, your true self starts to shine more authentically than ever before. And within that authenticity, you find a new kind of intimacy. It isn't about sharing every scar or telling your story in detail. It's about opening yourself to being seen as you are today, without pretenses, without pretensions. You no longer bear the burden of old masks. You're no longer offended by being misjudged. It no longer injures you as it did before, to be overlooked or left behind. That's because the source of your value no longer sits in other people's eyes. It sits within the relationship you've established with yourself. Someone born of silence, of late nights when you didn't fall back into cycles, of days when you held your ground. Even when nothing else held you still from that deep foundation, your old self moves aside, not because you expel it, but because it no longer vibrates on your present frequency. You can look back and bless that part of you as a part of your past, knowing that it did the best that it could with what it knew, with what it had, and with what it believed it needed to survive. But you are no longer surviving, you are creating, and in this conscious creation state, there's no place for rigid forms of yesterday. There's now room for softness, for fineness, for that which vibrates without having to scream. Your soul no longer has to impress, defend, or prove its lightness. It simply resides there, and in that space, any relationship that stays or comes into your life becomes a reflection of this new state of being, a place where love is no longer a drag, but an unintrusive support, where giving doesn't spring from scarcity, but abundance, where picking something or someone isn't about hanging on, but respecting what fits with who you are today. Your own perception of life shifts in a way that can't be reversed. You no longer see things as you once did. What was once unconscionable to you now manifests as a part of something bigger. What you once called failures, you now see as turning points in growth and change. You no longer address yourself as a victim. Your awareness has grown sufficiently to see that even the worst pain held a larger purpose that had to do with more than just suffering. Transcending your former self is not merely about healing your wounds, it is about seeing from a higher perspective, not because it makes you feel good, but because your soul can no longer see through the same eyes. You have transcended internally, and that internal transcendence enables you to see what once felt to you like chaos, as hidden order, as silent teachings, as coded messages in wait to be interpreted. Even your relationship with time shifts. You no longer exist in a state of perpetual waiting. You no longer pursue what eludes you, nor do you demand all things immediately. You start living in accord with the natural beat of your soul, a beat that does not hasten because of outside demands, but is informed by interior maturation. In this beat, everything moves otherwise. Your priorities reorder. What once seemed so important now fades, and things you once overlooked now feel sacred. You come to cherish quiet, honor the space, believe in the process even when you don't know all the steps. You no longer require assurances to proceed. You need only to feel that you're in alignment, and that is sufficient, because you now understand that the soul doesn't require knowing everything to proceed. It must only be attuned to what feels as truth. This being in alignment with your truth is now your guiding star. You no longer decide out of fear of getting it wrong. You no longer live out of obligation to meet others' expectations. Your decisions are no longer responses to a hurtful past. They are silent acts of respecting your current moment. And that subtle yet mighty shift shifts everything about the way you live. You no longer try to extract meaning from every experience. You've learned that real understanding can only come after you've released. And with that degree of energetic maturity, you quit trying to control everything. You let go of the need to insist on answers from life in the moment. You learn to live more gently, and that gentleness has nothing to do with weakness or passivity. That gentleness is sophisticated and silent power. Your strength is now internal, and unbreakable. You no longer have to prove your process or demonstrate your transformation to anyone. Your most sincere silence is more powerful than words will ever be. And that shifts the way you move through the world. You start moving through your days in greater awareness. The tiny moments, the instant pauses, the tiny gestures start to hold significance. You no longer pursue the next accomplishment, nor do you gauge your growth by what others can see. Now you gauge it by what you sense when you wake up in the morning, by the peace that you feel when you are alone, by the serenity that sounds within you, even when everything around you is in motion. Transcending the old self is stepping over the small identity you had before and embracing being in a greater plane of perception without having to leave your body, is living in a new frequency, another state of being without evading the world. You understand that it's no longer a matter of responding to whatever happens in life, but of intentionally deciding how you prefer to experience your reality. This intentional decision becomes the seed of change. It shifts the way you engage with all aspects of your life. What once represented a burden can now become a chance to be fully present. What once depleted you now melts away quietly and softly, without resistance, without bitterness. And although this change may not always be apparent to those around you, it is deep, lasting, and strong because now you don't rely on your situation to be at peace. Your peace of mind no longer rests on the success or failure of things going your way. It emanates from the degree of your fidelity to your true self, and that inner fidelity is not negotiable. It becomes your anchor, your center, your truth. The old self judged itself by its accomplishments, by others' validation, by applause and approvals, but you're not running after those illusions anymore. You've found that real happiness doesn't come with sound. It emerges in quiet, in the cadence of your breath, in the way you select your words, in the peaceful pride with which you move away from all that no longer feeds your spirit without harm or pain. You start seeing problems differently. They're no longer penalties or barriers designed to crush you. They're thresholds, gates through which your soul has to pass to stir the sleeping segments of you. You no longer run from them. You stand before them with the inner truth that they're not going to kill you, but to reveal you. And that transformation shifts your energy at the very core level. Your vibration no longer gives off fear or uncertainty. It gives off truth. A truth that does not need defending. That stands on its own in your eyes, in your presence, in your quiet. And it's in that moment of interior illumination that you understand the greatest shift didn't take place on the outside. It took place on the inside. The most profound transformation was never about fixing your surroundings. It was about observing life through the eyes of your awakened spirit, no longer through the lens of a self that had to be cured, validated, or appeased. Your energy becomes a magnet, drawing only that which vibrates to who you now are. You don't have to push, grab, or force. What is for you stays. What isn't just slips away peacefully and without drama. Even the challenges that come your way start to change. They don't go away, but they no longer annihilate you like they used to because you're no longer meeting them with the same hurt version of you. From that vantage point of waking, the mundane becomes sacred, not because the world transforms, but because your perception is no longer colored with lack or fear. Your eyes mellow, broaden, overflow with gratitude. You no longer require signs from God to hold on to belief or complete certainty to take a step. You start to move with a slower inner pace, not because you've slowed down in the world, but because you're no longer pursuing things that were never yours. You grant yourself the liberty to do things differently, even though nobody can possibly get it. You grant yourself license not to know everything, not to control everything, not to leave room for mystery to emerge, because now you know that life is conspiring to help you, not hinder you, and within that holy place, everything falls into place, not because you're putting in more, but because you're pushing back less. You are no longer the person you once were. You have evolved, and that evolution is not proclaimed. It's lived, it's sensed in quiet, only understood by the richness of your being. There's not a specific point where it all clicks. There's no labeled point of arrival. One day, you just know you no longer respond the same. Things that used to wound you now hardly touch you. Now you stand before them with a depth that doesn't require quick fixes, but yearns for genuine comprehension, with maturity that doesn't try to win, but to stay in line. You approach life not from a place of urgency, but from presence. You cease trying to be someone, and instead start to be who you actually are. And in that incarnation, everything is different, not at once, not loudly, but utterly. And that, even though nobody else notices, changes absolutely everything, because when your energy is congruent with your truth, your reality comes to the same point in return. There's no conflict, no fight, only synchronicity, only clarity, only that inner whisper that talks without voice, but reminds you effortlessly of what you've always understood. Your energy is no longer dissipated in 1,000 different places. It gathers, lines up, becomes a current, one that flows not from pressure or expectation but from a place within you that has no name and requires no explication. This place, this guide is born of connection with something more than your identity, your designations, your past. You no longer are to sustain an image, you are to express an essence. You no longer navigate life, fueled by the urgency that once ruled your inner world. You've altered, not on the surface, but at the root. And change of that magnitude is so deep, it doesn't require a label to be true. You sense it in the way you hold yourself, in the way you opt for peace over performance. It is reflected in your capacity to be silent without fear, to embrace uncertainty without forsaking your center, to live from the foundation without ornamenting it. That truth that has been present with you all along, patiently waiting while you were busy proving, surviving, chasing, waiting for you to drop the same things that held your attention. And you did. You released. You chose otherwise. You moved ahead, and in doing so without even knowing it, you became more, not as a goal, but as an organic byproduct of choosing truth over routine, remaining faithful to yourself. When silence was more difficult than noise of staying by your soul, when turning back would have been the easy way, now that old you no longer dictates, and instead in its place is someone genuine, someone gentle, someone more you than ever. From here, from this place of being, a new page begins, not one that you respond to, but one where you reply with being there. You no longer crave approval because you've remembered your own value simply for being. You no longer crave belonging because your soul has recalled that its home forever was within you. Life is no longer a competition. It becomes a sanctified unfolding, not because all is perfect, but because you've ceased to resist what is not. You greet each moment not with resignation, but with a peace that comes from reconciliation with the now. Your days are no longer a repetition. They become an expression of your new frequency. Each word that comes out of your mouth, each glance you give, each step you make bears the mark of one who has decided to live from the center, and that mark, invisible as it may be, makes its presence felt, because a soul having evolved beyond itself doesn't have to lift mountains in order to change the world. Its presence is sufficient. It's a silent cure, a reminder that living in sync is not just possible, it's potent. It demonstrates to others that healing is real, that releasing does not equal forgetting, that becoming does not equal abandoning what you used to be. It equals respecting the journey, that each step led you to this point, to this now. And now that you're here, your frequency speaks for you, and the world answers. If you believe that this message speaks to you somewhere in the depths of your being, it is no accident. Your soul had already known. It was simply waiting for you to recall. Recall yourself, because transcendence of the old self is not an ending, it's a start where you finally come back to yourself fully, without fear, without masks, without burden. Jung once stated that enlightenment is not achieved by visualizing figures of light, but through bringing the darkness to consciousness, and in those 3 words is a truth that people will go a lifetime to avoid, because confronting your darkness, knowing your shadow, is one of the most frightening and freeing things a human being can go through. It's not a metaphor of poetry. It's a raw, at times painful process, of stripping away the layers of who you think you were, only to be confronted with the parts of yourself that you worked so hard to ignore, suppress, or deny. And yet, if you're hearing this right now, it's because something inside of you has already shifted. You've moved past that invisible line where you no longer run from the dark places in your mind. You've decided to stop running. Have you worked up the courage to look within and face the wounds, the memories, the patterns, and the emotions that once had control over you? That's not a small step. That's the start of real transformation. You see, the shadow is not something to be eliminated or destroyed. It's not your enemy. It's a part of you that's been waiting in silence. Your love, your acceptance, bringing the darkness to consciousness means being able to see it, name it, and finally integrate it. And when you do that, something miraculous occurs. The same parts of you that you once thought were broken become the wellspring of your deepest understanding. Pain becomes instructive, fear becomes guide, chaos becomes an entrance to clarity. You have trod that road. You have grasped your shadow by the hand and said, I see you, I know you are there, and I am ready to hear you. That takes courage, that takes strength, and it's a path that many people take, not for one lifetime but for an entire lifetime. But you didn't turn your shadow into a bridge, rather than a burden, and now you navigate the world from a place that is more grounded, more authentic, more real. And if in some way this place has been your traveling companion, if the words you've read here have spoken to something deep and primal within you, then you must know this. You do not travel alone. You're part of something greater, something that goes beyond words and time. It's a shared remembering, a collective awakening. There are others like you emerging from illusion and entering into authenticity, choosing presence over perfection, choosing wholeness over avoidance. So if your heart is drawn to keep moving, to keep letting go of the false and embracing the true, then come walk with us. Keep walking, because each step you take inward vibrates outward. Each time you lean toward truth rather than comfort, darkness rather than denial, light is born. It's not imagined, it's not coerced, but uncovered naturally. You're not who you used to be anymore, and you're not the only one. You were never lacking, you were never too much or too little. You were just asleep, dreaming another person's dream of how you would be, donning another person's pain like a second skin, spouting another person's fears as if they were your reality. But now you recall something essential has changed in the space between your mind. The former you, the one who hungered for validation in empty spaces, who wore wounds like badges, who confused passion with closeness, that self is melting away quietly into what they always were, a lovely, needed chapter in the narrative of your becoming. What is left is what was always present, hiding beneath the din, pure, unbreakable, free. This is not the conclusion of your change. This is the point at which you discover change was never the aim. You are not growing into someone else. You are finally fully unapologetically becoming who you are. And the world, the true world, not the one constructed from fear and projection, has been waiting for you all along. Welcome home. And if these words have stirred something in you, if you sense that this journey speaks to the quiet truth you hold deep in your heart, then I welcome you to remain near. This space was designed for spirits such as yours, for hearts who are willing to tread a new road, one of depth, presence, and inner clarity. So, if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe, not only to a channel, but to a shift in consciousness, because every video, every contemplation, every moment we spend here is intended to guide your way and remind you of who you truly are, beyond the noise. Subscribe, and let's keep on this journey.